Sense Studios, and I am here with the incredibly intelligent Jackson Wheat to talk about evolution and things that have come from it. How are you doing, Jackson?
Well, I'm doing just fine today. How are you?
I'm excellent. I'm sick, but I'm excellent.
Well, that is good.
I know this is a kind of like a complicated subject, but you seem to do well with those. I've seen your YouTube channel. It's pretty intense. I mean, it's wonderful information, great fun to watch. You really handle scientific subjects gracefully. What made you do this?
Well, interestingly, it all started out when I met a nationalist in a red sash. Um, we had a whole conversation at school I go to, LSU, uh, Louisiana State University, where uh, he gave me this whole pamphlet about just a range of funny topics. It was like why socialism sucks, and then it was like socialism degrades the family and all this stuff, and I thought it was very funny. Um, but he also kind of made a point about uh, what types of sciences he thinks should be taught and things like that. And so my roommate at the time suggested that I make video responses to the videos that this guy suggested I watch, which talk about
Oh,
yeah.
that's really good. And I have to thank your friend for getting you into YouTube because I think you're a wonderful person to have on the YouTube community. Um,
Why, thank you. So yeah, so the guy, the nationalist in the red sash, uh, told me to watch these videos about like intelligent design and creationism, and uh, so so there were so I started watching the videos, and there were like 36 of them. So I think I got to 3 or maybe 4, and I had to stop. I just couldn't watch all of them, and so I started focusing more on doing more just teaching videos, talking about um, creationism and science, and I kind of moved towards talking more about teaching science rather than just creationism, which I think is more useful because as you teach science, you explain why creationism doesn't work.
yeah.
Um, for example, when you talk about, I have a video titled Genetics, and so Nathaniel Jensen came out with a book fairly recently titled Doubting Darwin, and he's a do what?
Oh no, I think that's funny. Doubting Darwin. Mm.
Yeah, I think he's a geneticist, and and so when you actually look at genetics, not when you try to shoehorn it into a biased narrative, you realize, hey, no, actually, it does not support creationism. Uh,
No,
Genetics can't possibly fit into a 6 to 10,000 year old Earth. It can't possibly, unless everything we know about genetics were completely wrong. Um,
genetics came from evolution, though, right? I mean, we wouldn't be messing with DNA. It wasn't
uh,
for it, right?
um,
Fill me
well,
in
not
here.
exactly. Well, it was more like, so you had Mendel, you had Gregor Mendel, who's an Austrian monk, and he's doing his little pea plant experiments because back then in the late 1800s, the only way to be a scholar or get higher education was to do it via the church. So you had to be a monk to do it or something like that.
Oh no.
And so yeah, he became a monk and he's studying pea plants, and the church gives him the ability, the resources to carry out these experiments. And so he figures out that, I mean, Darwin had figured out that for evolution to work, you would have to inherit traits through successive generations.
Hmm.
And Mendel kind of went about figuring out how that worked. So Mendel's work was independently rediscovered in the around the turn of the 20th century by three different scientists or groups of scientists. And so they kind of rediscovered his work, and over time we developed more of an understanding on genetics. We figured out that it was DNA, not proteins, that carry the information for determining traits and things like that. And so kind of, I mean, uh, genetics is linked wholeheartedly to evolution. You can't have evolution without genetics. Um,
Yeah.
but
I forgot
yeah,
about Mendel. Didn't he say something about hereditary genes? Not uh, dominant genes.
yeah, dominant and recessive genes. Like with this plant, you had the I don't remember which way it was, if round or wrinkled was dominant, but yeah, it was like if you had uh you do the little Mendelian crosses, which is what we all have to do in high school biology and then in early college
Yeah, I
biology.
had that 35 years ago. So,
Right. Yeah, it's a good time. And then you realize after just, you know, three traits that you're looking at, things already start to get crazy. And then, four or more, it's just absurd the number of squares there are. And then on the other hand, you look at well then you realize, or you look at the number of traits that we actually have, and you realize, yeah, we can't really make Punnett squares for all this.
I
For the
can't
number,
imagine.
yeah.
The details, and if you look into it, and even what I remember about that plant, when they were talking about splicing plants and breeding plants, and I'm even doing the little charts for my class. I remember going, this is a lot of drawing, because our teacher made us draw it and make little charts, and I'm going, this is a lot, but it's not, because I'm not a scientist, and I'm not filling up journals and then making more points about it and going into more detail, and yeah, that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
a lot of things have come from evolution that I think a lot of people don't even think is even remotely related to evolution. And it's all making an impact on our lives.
Hmm.
So what do you think
Uh-oh.
is your favorite thing, or one of the most interesting subjects that come from evolution?
Well, for me, I really like biogeography. I think that biogeography is very interesting because it tells us why organisms live where they do. Lots and lots and lots of papers have been published going all the way back to Origin of Species, and I'm sure before that, because Darwin realized, hey, why are there only, bats uh, and rats? Like, why are these guys the only mammals on distant and cows and whatnot aren't also on, these Pacific islands way out in the middle of nowhere? Um, and so it has evolved like everything else, uh, because now we can look at the genetics of different organisms and we can determine, hey, why are these organisms over here, not over here? From that is that just the geographic placement of these organisms corresponds directly to their evolutionary history. Um, One of the papers that I found, um, which I actually attended the lecture for it at LSU,
Oh,
is
wow. Okay.
do ecological communities? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think that's great that you went to the lecture.
Did you say something? Hello? Can
I
you hear me?
think it's great that you went to the lecture.
Oh, okay. I was afraid it was. Uh, um, but yeah, I went to the lecture because the guy who was one of this paper was at the Museum of Natural Science, which was really cool. It was super fun to listen to this guy talk, and I went and I read the paper afterwards, and it's really neat stuff. Um, this paper, do ecological communities disperse across biogeographic barriers as a unit? This pitcher plant called Sarracenia, and so Sarracenia is on forms a or formed a relationship with these these arthropods like the flesh flies, and so they spend their whole lives around these pitcher plants, or at least a large part of their lives.
Oh my.
And so when the pitcher plant first across the Mississippi River to the other side, uh, these flesh flies also went with it. And so when the pitcher plant on one side of the river speciated from the other side, the flies speciated with the pitcher plant.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
That's very interesting.
yeah, it was really neat.
Now,
Um,
I
let's see.
know
I
from
have
our brief
another
conversation before you
another
mentioned.
paper. Oh, sorry.
Hello?
Am I cutting out?
No, yeah, a little bit.
Oh, that's not good.
Um, might want to see if another program's trying to come on or something. But I know one thing that you were talking about briefly when we were talking about doing this. You said that they've used evolution to make predictions of where to find certain things, and they found them. Are you there? I am waiting for Jackson.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I uh
I
I
think
think
the button to push right now would be F5. It might make you sign back in, but it might that might help. One of the things I really wanted to do with this video is to
there we go. Can you hear me?
yes, yes,
Okay, great. I can hear you also. You sound great.
great, great. But one of the things I really wanted from this video is to talk about the things that have come from evolution. And what I was saying before I started cutting out on you all the time was how you and I were talking about how science has been able to make predictions about where to find things, and they found them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Uh, Tiktaalik is one example, and Microraptor and Archaeopteryx. Well, Archaeopteryx was an early one. There was also Diarthrognathes and Spheca Um,
And these things are
so Tiktaalik is the quintessential fishapod, as a lot of people like to call it, because it has uh, features of fish and tetrapods. For instance, it has the head and lungs of a tetrapod, but the fins of a fish, and also it has wrist and ankle joints intermediate between fish and tetrapods.
that is so cool.
Yeah, so Neil Shubin and his colleagues were they were arguing about something, and so they opened up a textbook and they realized there was this whole section of Arctic Canada that was Devonian strata that had yet to be explored. And so they predicted that there should be some fishapod ancestor in that Devonian strata because it was of the right age where we should expect to find these guys. And surely enough, after I think it was 5 years of searching, they came across it.
That
And
is
so that,
great.
yeah, it was a fantastic prediction of evolution. It was exactly where we expected it to be in the fossil record. Um, if there were a global flood, if the Earth were only 6,000 years old, we could not make predictions like that. It would not be possible because everything would be all mixed up. We'd have bunnies in the Cambrian and Archaeopteryx with parakeets and things like that. It would just be
Oh, yeah,
ridiculous.
that's weird. That I never thought of that point before. How it would mix everything. That wouldn't make any sense if it didn't happen.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Microraptor was another one. It was predicted by this guy named William Beebe back in the early 1900s. He said uh, that if birds are descended from dinosaurs, then we should find a dinosaur with asymmetrical flight feathers on its front and back limbs, because birds have vestigial feathers on their back limbs, even though they don't fly using their back limbs. And so back in, I think it was 2003, they found Microraptor, which, as it happens, has these asymmetrical feathers on its front and back limbs. And so, well, William Beebe had called it Tetrapteryx back in the early 1900s. And so this was yet another confirmation of a hypothesis based on evolutionary theory.
That's
Um,
really
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Archaeopteryx was a really early test of or a confirmation of evolutionary theory, because Darwin predicted, or Darwin says that you know, uh, well, I guess not so much evolution, but common ancestry. So Darwin said that uh, we should find the common ancestor between birds and other animals, just like we should have common ancestors among all the different organisms. And so, only 2 years after Origin of Species was published back in 1859, they found Archaeopteryx, which was a bird with characteristics of reptiles. It has the teeth, the long bony tail, which modern birds do not have either of those characteristics. And so yeah, that was an early confirmation of common ancestry.
I love when science can predict something and find it, or they use it to know what to look for.
Right? Yeah.
And it's it's amazing because it's just like, okay, if I didn't believe it before, definitely see the evidence for it now.
Hmm. Yeah. You won't hear about the predictive power of evolution from the other side, which I think is very telling, um, because it works. It's not just the just so or ad hoc stories that creationists want you to believe it is. Um, it is in fact making testable, verifiable predictions. Um, another example was Diarthrognathes, which was one of those mammal-like reptiles. And so the idea was that mammals are descended from reptiles, and that if that were true, then how would the reptilian jaw become the mammalian jaw? So they're this double jointed jaw was would have had to be formed, but we didn't have evidence of it yet, and so it was predicted, and eventually it was found in Diarthrognathes, which means two jointed jaw. So there are a whole lot of predictions like that uh within evolutionary theory. There are just lots and lots of them, and it's amazing. It's amazing that we were able to make predictions like that because, like, if evolution weren't true, if these guys didn't share common ancestors, but were only created magically 10,000 years ago, then these predictions would be just unable to happen. And so,
Definitely, definitely, that would be unable to happen, and we wouldn't have any explanations for it. We would just have to accept it on face value and, insert some kind of myth in there and move on.
right? I mean, it's not that creationism doesn't make predictions, it most certainly does. It's just that these predictions are constantly falsified. um,
I'm
I
not
mean,
familiar with
I
the
mean,
predictions on their side.
well, a prediction of creationism would be that all these guys were living together, created, on days 4 or 5, whatever.
Wait, you mean
Um,
dinosaurs and humans were supposed to live together? What is this, the Flintstones?
Pretty much. Yeah, I think Arnor called it Flintstones archaeology. Um, so they were all made. All the animals were made in the course of a few days. So elephants and T Rexes should be in the same strata. You know, um, but they're not. They're consistently not. Uh, we don't find non-avian dinosaurs with elephants or with humans. We don't find Archaeopteryx with parakeets or pelicans or anything like that. We do not find these mixtures of animals that we should if they were all made on the same day 10,000 years ago. We don't find mosasaurs with whales or trilobites with flounders or things like that. It just doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. The Before I took a course in Khan Academy about evolution, the most I ever thought about it, other than human ancestry, was a subject near and dear to my heart, which is vaccines evolving, um, basically plague. I have this obsession with plague, and I didn't think predictions. I never thought evolution would be able to be used in any way towards a prediction, but it's really opened my eyes to just how powerful this information is.
Definitely, yeah. Everyone's heard of the hoax Piltdown Man, which didn't really fool much of anyone, but creationists like to believe that it fooled the entire anthropological community.
I
Um,
didn't hear of that. I don't know what that is.
Piltdown Man was a human skull with the jaw of an orangutan in the heck, what was it? It's like early 1900s, early to mid 1900s.
Oh
Um,
no.
Basically, yeah, this skull was presented to the British Anthropological Society. I don't remember the name, but and they because the idea was uh, we were finding these human remains in Africa and Asia, and the British were like, "Hey, we need our human ancestors. Where are good fossils of human ancestry in Britain?" Um,
Oh.
which,
Okay.
well, yeah, I mean, back then it was a matter of pride, but but of course we understand now why we don't really have, or we don't have Homo erectus in Britain, or Australopithecines or things like that. We understand now why they were in Asia and Africa. So this this skull is presented to whatever anthropological society it was, and a group of them say, "Yay! This is the human fossil we've been looking for." The only problem was it didn't fit in with the understanding of human evolution that we already had. And as more and more finds were uh, were uncovered, this skull became more and more and more anomalous. It just did not fit with the picture that evolution was painting. And so it turns out they eventually do all these tests on it, and they find out, hey, the skull is human, but the jaw is orangutan. and and interestingly, one of the guys who has been alleged as the perpetrator of Piltdown Man was the author of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh, a smear on my beloved Arthur.
Oh, he believed in fairies, so
A lot of my favorite writers had some sort of thing like that. Yeah. Or
yeah.
they either
Uh,
saw angels in the trees or had
mhm.
issues about getting fully dressed or yeah, fiction writers are well, my favorites.
Yeah. He was interesting.
Yeah,
He was
yeah.
an interesting character. Um,
But he
well,
he did so he did his stories did impact the forensic world, which is also another place where evolution and sciences that help us figure out crime have come
oh yeah.
from. It just seems to impact on everything. And you know, coming up to this talk, I was looking up subjects, and it's got, and I'm going, there's way too many subjects. There's no way to pick one.
Hmm. Yeah. Evolution has definitely impacted forensic anthropology.
Mm.
It's impacted even entomology, uh, or forensic entomology. You look at the insects that are on this body, and based on the habits and species of the insect, you can tell long, or tell how long the body was out there, stuff like that. And so, what's really interesting is that um, I don't remember which way it was, but I think forensics had the facial reconstruction first, and then that was later applied to anthropology. I think.
I'm not sure which one went first, but I do know that all of a sudden it was a huge thing because I think it might be forensics that came up with it first because of the tissue depth and looking for people. Because even though a sketch may not look like a person very much, or but the facial reconstruction thing did do more because you can't really predict whether the hair is straight or curly or all that, but it has helped in solving crimes and identifying victims that no one was looking for. And I think that's incredible that that comes from just the ability to, okay, there's a science, and this science came from this science, and this science came from that science. So science and tech on its own evolves. In that itself is an evolution. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm not the smart one here. You are.
I think you're pretty smart.
Thank you. But your your channels and your videos, the are you going to do a complete thing? Like what's your current subject that you're going into?
Um, well, my channel generally focuses on teaching about evolutionary biology, and recently my videos have been focusing on the concept of irreducible complexity.
What
Um,
does that mean? Irreducible complexity.
So irreducible complexity is the idea that a structure can't be broken down into functional constituent parts. Uh, or if you remove some part of this structure, then the whole thing just breaks down. Just doesn't work at all. One of the main proponents of that is an intelligent design proponent or guy named Michael Behe. Wrote this whole book called Darwin's Black Box, uh, which expounds on irreducible complexity. One of his favorite examples is the bacterial flagellum, which, I mean, there's no such thing as the one bacterial flagellum. There are all these different types of flagella. Um, and so he points out, you take any one of these different structures out, and the whole thing just collapses. Well, it turns out that multiple models of bacterial or of the flagellum's evolution have been worked out, and so which with each step being totally functional to its possessor. And so I made a video about it fairly recently, and so it's really not an issue
I did see it.
anymore. Yeah,
I did
so
see that video.
yeah, so it's not really an issue so much anymore. Same with the eye. Came out with a recent, actually I think that's my most recent video, was the evolution of the eye, because that's another one of their favorites. They're like, oh, if we take out any part of the eye, it just becomes non-functional. Well, it turns out there's a whole huge variety of eyes amongst organisms. There are subcellular eyes in euglenoids and warnoids, which are these little uh, planktonic guys. Um, there are these cup eyes in flatworms, uh, uh, eyes that they're like ropalia in jellyfish, or in like a cubozoan jellyfish, which are the box jellies.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's odd though. I mean, what's the obsession with the eye though? Is that because Darwin made a comment and it was they just take that small little comment and don't read on to see the follow up?
that is a large part of it. Yes.
Okay.
um, they it's really easy to tell who hadn't read Origin of Species because they'll quote that sentence, and then you look only two sentences later, and he says, you know, he's like, hey, I'm not actually worried about the eye though, because it really seems that it most certainly could have evolved. um,
I see. Yeah, that's a problem because I think they a lot of quote mining was is that the term? It's quote mining. They go anyone can go and find a quote to back up
yeah,
their
good old quote
bias.
mine.
Yeah, and then
Hmm.
they have this quote that they think backs them up. It's from a really famous person, and they can feel good about their opinion now because opinion is not fact. And just sort of, here we go. I hope we, and I hope we don't keep doing things like that. You know, you've got people who think that evolution is a ladder, and it's not. And they think, oh well, this has
Right.
to. It's like they're trying to even make their own predictive stop signs. Oh, well, this can't happen. Well, if you understood it, then you could understand that it can. And they
Yeah.
don't
The
understand where speciation comes
oh,
from. They think it's Pokemon. Like I'm gonna be a
oh
Stegosaurus
yeah,
tomorrow.
yeah, it's like metamorphosis.
Yeah, that's a problem. There's just a whole bunch of problems. And meanwhile, you've got up until this year because the flu vaccine is only 10% effective. Well, at least the one from the beginning of the season was. But they make predictions about disease every year and they save thousands of lives every year because of the predictability of evolution. But they don't look
Right.
at it that way. And that's the frustrating point to me. I think the videos you do, I it may not seem like, oh well, I'm gonna learn about flagellums now, or I'm gonna learn about the eye and blah blah blah. Yeah, it's really cool, and yeah, it matters. And if you do understand anything about evolution, or even if you don't, I think your channel is a really good place to go and get your feet wet.
Thank you. I
I
hope it is.
I'm enjoying it. I've forwarded it to a few religious friends of mine, and one of them asked me what evolution even was, and I'm sitting there going, "At your age, I think you should know."
Yeah. Yeah. R- Really just defining what evolution is, I think alleviates some of the problems immediately. Because a lot of people don't even know what the definition is. When I release my video on 15 questions for evolutionists, you'll see that they have no idea what the definition is. It's it's not even wrong. you know, um, it's and part of the problem is uh, I don't think creationists in general are very good with definitions. I mean, you look at their work and they're throwing around words like kind and information, uh,
What
which
does kind mean? Do you know?
exactly. No, I have no idea. I documented um, varying degrees of usages among creationists in my video New Kinds, where I talk about the evolution of fish. Um, well, for most of it. One of the first things I do is I show that no, creationists don't actually have any idea what kinds are. Uh, Kent Hovind says a kind is basically a species. It's the reproductive boundary of a population of organisms, which is fine. I'm fine with that definition. Um, John Woodmarap said in his book Noah's Ark: A Feasibility Study that a kind is about the genus level. Ken Ham said during his debate with Bill Nye that a kind is simultaneously a family and an order. And I remember reading creationist articles from Answers in Genesis that say uh, kind means around family, but it can fluctuate, which I thought was funny. Um, Georgia Purdom, another geneticist, or she's a geneticist for Answers in Genesis, she said that there was a bird kind and a dinosaur kind, and I have her, I think it's Evolutionalist Part 3, uh, where she says that so the entirety of birds, the entirety of dinosaurs are contained in different kinds, which is funny because they will also say how many different kinds of sauropods were there, sauropods being the long-necked dinosaurs, or how many different kinds of birds are there. So they really don't know. Um, you can basically get them to continually widen what a kind is if you say like Arn Ra has his phylogeny challenge. It's like, okay, well, okay, you say finch is raw. There's a finch kind. Well, are finches also related to grosbeaks? Well,
Oh
are
no.
yeah, it's like, well, are they also related to these birds over here? What about these birds? What about these birds? And you just slowly widen it. And in a lot of cases, the creationists will just say, yeah, they're probably related to that too, and that, and that, and that, until you get to some kind of divide like between modern birds and modern reptiles, and they say, no, I don't think birds are related to crocodiles, even though we can show genetically that birds are the closest relatives of crocodilians. And
Really? I didn't know that.
yeah, they're both members of the clade Archosauria. Basically crocodiles and the ancestors of birds, dinosaurs, split in the early Triassic, I think. It was either early Triassic or late Permian. So they split, and the dinosaurs became these kind of went in a bipedal direction, while the crocodilians stayed in a more quadrupedal direction. And so yeah, they are the most closely related to each other, which is really interesting. And so yeah, that really doesn't make any sense from a creationist perspective. Why the heck should birds be closely related to crocodiles when they look nothing alike? Of course, baraminologists, the people who try to determine what kinds are, they really don't use genetics much. They try to avoid genetics, which is really funny because genetics doesn't support baraminology at all. Georgia Purdom is a geneticist, and she looks at solely morphology in her analyses of different kinds, because I think they realize on some level genetics does not help. In fact, it hurts a lot.
Because it negates what they want to insist upon?
Yeah, it shows that when you look at the sequences of nucleotides between humans and chimps, we are more closely related to chimps than chimps are to gorillas. And you know, that we share more in common with you know, say lancelets than we do with like beetles, and you know, just all it sets up the tree of life. And from a creationist perspective, why the heck should it do that? There's no reason to. We're all separately created, aren't we? But it does, and they know this, and so they have to avoid it. They have to avoid genetics.
That's very difficult.
Yeah, but then they'll try to make these arguments that, oh no, the genetics are different. They don't actually show relatedness, and they'll misquote various studies, like was it John Sanford? I think his first name was John, but I know it's Sanford. He did his book on genetic entropy. Genetic entropy is the idea among creationists only that DNA only gets worse over time. That, you know, it just breaks down, and it's like God wound up a clock, and He's just letting it slowly everything break down, which is the general creationist idea about how life proceeds. Things are just breaking down. They're not, you know, there's no new functions and structures are being added to organisms. They're just going down, losing things. So Sanford basically completely misquotes an earlier study by Moto Kimura, which is his neutral theory of mutation, which is that mutations are generally either neutral or detrimental, but beneficial mutations provide like a huge advantage to organisms and basically counteract the neutral and detrimental mutations, which we consistently see. So yeah.
Yeah. I have a really stupid question for you.
It's probably not.
It probably is. Can you keep something from evolving other than to kill it?
I would say probably not. Technically, yes. There's an equation called the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
It's p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1. And so what this equation does is you take a little snapshot of the frequencies of alleles in a population at a given time. And so what they figured out was that, yes, a population will not vary in allele frequencies from generation to generation, which is the definition of evolution, if you meet a certain set of criteria. If there are no mutations, if there's completely random mating, if there's a gigantic population, if there's no natural selection, Uh, there's total gene flow, things like that, no subpopulations. So basically, if you meet a set of criteria that are more or less impossible in nature, then yes, you can keep a population from evolving. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, I did a video where I talked about it called "The Mathematics of Population Genetics." Uh,
Mathematics of population genetics.
yes,
I'm definitely going to be watching that.
all right. Yeah, it was that was one of my first uh evidence for evolution videos. I think that was the second one, right after pointing to common ancestry. And so,
Oh, I've heard people request that you put your videos in a playlist.
they were referring to common ancestry. So, I did a series of 7 videos, um, titled "Common Ancestry," and they were they were in the "How Evolution Works" playlist originally. I took them all out, put them in their own separate playlist. What the first one did was I talked about a little bit about the history of evolutionary theory and some predictions that we can make using evolutionary theory. Then the second one, I looked at a number of common ancestors between us and, other primates, and reptiles and amphibians. And then there's new kinds, which takes us to the fish. And then it's uh, it's the last of the bilaterians and common ancestry 3, I think. Yeah. And then it's the rest of the animals in part 4. Then it's the protist world in part 5, and then uh, it's the prokaryotes, the organisms without nuclei, and the last universal common ancestor in part 6. So, yeah.
But you did make that playlist for them.
Yes, I thought it was a good suggestion. Someone said, please make this into a playlist, and I said I said deal. And
Yeah,
then
I saw the request, but I didn't see you say
do
deal, and I'm going, ooh, okay, I'm going to have to put that down if he makes the playlist so I can watch it. Because what I do is I listen to YouTube while I'm working, and I don't. I sometimes I forget to hit the next video, or I forget to do whatever, or I put it on shuffle by accident, which doesn't make any sense. But it it helps me, and I'm sitting there going, well, if he's gonna make a playlist out of that, then I'll play that one next.
yeah, I tried to channel my inner Dawkins for that playlist. It goes backwards through time rather than forwards.
I
Um,
think that's helpful.
I also know that R and Roz do what?
I like it when you go. I
What'd
like
you
it
say?
when you go backwards in time instead of starting in a place that's unfamiliar. You start.
I also know that R and
I prefer it when the playlist goes backwards in time. When information starts
oh,
with the
okay.
familiar and then goes to somewhere that's not familiar, it kind of helps order things in the brain. That's my favorite way of dealing with it. Rather than I prefer that
Right.
to like here's the ancient thing and here's the modern thing and you put them together and things like that. My brain just likes going backwards in time in increments.
Hmm.
That's all.
Yeah, what I like about that approach is that it derails the idea of of um a hierarchy, like a ladder like progression of
Mhm.
evolution. You know, you had the prokaryotes, and then the protists are then have the early
You're,
animals, which are slightly better than the protists.
yeah.
But,
I think you're breaking up again.
okay.
It might be my side. I'm thinking it might be my side, but I don't think any of my programs are coming on. There
Okay.
he is.
Okay, sorry. Um,
Much better.
okay, yeah, I agree. I think it's really neat to go backwards in time, starting with the familiar and then going more and more into the unfamiliar, and showing, well, our ancestor with these guys may have looked like us, but our ancestor with these other guys looked slightly less like us, and then you just keep going backwards, uh and then you get into things that are just completely alien. You get into these, by the time you go back into like the Cambrian 542 million years ago, or the start of the Cambrian, our ancestors are these little fish kind of like guys. you know
Which is amazing. One of the most disturbing things that and also most fascinating things that I think is happening right now is because we're losing so much ice, we are finding so many mummified or skeletonized samples to get. They're in ice, they're not in rock. So I think they even found like a baby woolly mammoth and ate part of it. One guy ate mammoth meat, and I'm going, okay. And I know that's not evolution, but I'm just adding that because those things add to more information,
right.
more material to look at.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's neat. They're finding some neat stuff in the ice. I like when they find like frozen mammoths or woolly rhinos. And what's really cool about the preserved uh elephants, as well as preserved horses and stuff like that, is that we've been able to figure out some of their evolutionary history based on the genetics that we can glean from those finds, those remains. Um,
That's absolutely crazy.
yeah, yeah. In my video, elephant evolution, I look at a number of different uh, elephants where they look at the paleogenomics of these guys to figure out how they're related to each other. Paleogenomics is basically where you look at the genes of these ancient organisms to reconstruct phylogenetic histories. And so it's really, really cool, but it only works with the fairly recent past, within the past uh, few thousand years or so.
Now
Still really cool stuff.
I'm gonna be completely changed from the fangirl to someone who has an issue with all this. And I'm gonna ask you, what's the point of it? How does that benefit me?
Well, I think all knowledge is beneficial for us. Um,
Well, why should
but
I? Why does finding an ancient creature in the ice, like, how does that impact my life? I'm just trying to pay my bills, and you know,
well, for some people, finding these ancient creatures in the fossils does impact their bills. Uh,
yes, it does.
but I mean, well, as we were talking about earlier, there's an entire field that is coming out of evolution called evolutionary physiology, which is using evolution to help understand uh, the physiology of not just us, but also other organisms, and see if this can have impacts on us. Um, and so there's a lot of stuff, not just fossils and the genetics of some obscure animal that lived 10,000 years ago that we should that has come out of evolution. There's also uh, studies on vaccines and studies on physiology, uh, and there's forensics that we were also talking about. There's just
And
a whole
the
lot that comes out.
physiology thing, would that help predict either changes in genetic diseases or genetic disorders?
Uh, I'm not entirely sure of that. I'd have to do more research on that.
Okay,
But
because
I think that would be interesting, but I think people would also uh immediately, start talking about, oh, designer babies. Ah,
yeah, I've heard some of the drama around designer babies. Personally, I don't fear that. I don't fear the whole like, oh well, I want a child that's 6 feet tall and can drag a bus down the road. And
right.
has a tail and wears a superhero costume. No, I really don't think I fear that. I don't fear the cloning process. I don't fear. I think we're much better than we were when it comes to science. I think we understand a lot more than we used to. So we don't have to do crazy experimentation. But I think no experimentation is more dangerous than experimenting. And as far as trying to get rid of a childhood disease, that's like saying don't vaccinate. It's not. It's like this experience is not going to make this person better. It it certainly doesn't make a person worse. But the thing is, if you don't have to suffer, why should you? You know, it's like, oh, it's congenital heart disease. Well, if you can
Right.
avoid congenital heart disease, yay!
No, I earned my heart disease and I'm gonna keep it.
Oh, it's delicious. Yeah, no,
Yep,
I,
exactly.
I know, but I don't want to take up your entire afternoon, but I would like to have you back on. And I'm sorry for being so random, and I know I left my own subject and dragged you down every rabbit hole I could think of, but
That's okay. I enjoy talking, as I think
I
you know.
I really think the subject's too big because there's so much that comes from it, and I really think that it, a lot of a stable future depends on understanding what evolution is and where it's going to go, because even that's not stagnant.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. I enjoyed. I always enjoy talking about it. It is my favorite subject. It's why I'm
I certainly hope so because
going through all the torture of college.
your YouTube is a love letter of knowledge. Really, it's wonderful, and I really hope people check it out. Links to Jackson are going to be in the description of the video. Links to his Twitter are also going in the description to the video. As you can see, he is absolutely charming and absolutely knowledgeable. Check him out. Don't This isn't just all he is. These subjects are not the only ones, and it goes much deeper, much further, and they are careers. Science can get you a interesting life.
Exactly.
What are you going to do with yours?
Well, I would like to do research in evolutionary biology. Um, I would like to, I guess, study relationships of different organisms because I find that absolutely fascinating. And if you listen to other people who to do that kind of work, it is absolutely fascinating to them. Um, the video I was telling you earlier that PZ Meyer dropped was about, or one of the, it was a channel, and one of the videos on it was about this lady who's a systematist. She looks at the relatedness of different organisms, and she studies lemurs in Madagascar, as well as also some carnivorans from Madagascar.
Oh
And it's
wow.
just, yeah, and they found some really interesting stuff like that. The lemurs were all, I think, descended from a single ancestral group that came to Madagascar, like late Paleocene or something like that. Um, and the carnivorans were also all descended from a single uh, immigration event millions of years ago. And so it's just absolutely fascinating. It's amazing stuff. I love that all these organisms are related to each other, and that we can discern who's related to who. That
Yeah.
just astounds me.
Oh yeah. That
And so that's
that's
why I make videos about it.
I'm glad you do. I've only gotten through a fraction of them. Um and a very random one because I do tend to use shuffle when I shouldn't.
Okay.
But I do love them and I will be a fangirl and I will be watching and I might make my a couple of my own playlists on my personal YouTube. I have several YouTubes because
I
it's
have
the
all the
only way.
YouTubes.
Yep, I have all kinds of YouTubes. I have YouTubes that I use to watch nonsense because sometimes I need nonsense. But Jackson, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully next time I can stay on topic. But I don't. I I I think this was really good. I
Yeah, I
really
also
do.
I hope that I have fewer technical difficulties.
Yeah, it could have been something on my end, but I'm gonna end the
Well,
broadcast and then I'm just gonna talk to you for a moment longer and that will be that. But thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a good one. Bye.